Morning, Keith.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome.
So we're here at Finnriver cidery in Chimacum, Washington. And Keith, I've got a couple questions.
Sure.
So why farming?
Why farming? I think on some level, my family have been farmers for many generations as far as we know. And I grew up on a farm in eastern Washington. So I kind of have the seasons and the rhythm of farming is kind of a deeper part of me. I've always knew that I wanted to raise my family on a farm. I wanted to have kids and be on a farm with my kids and have them, with that experience of growing food and fixing things and learning how to weld and just some useful practical life skills that go along with farming. I like the connection to land and the idea of growing food that people in our community eat and enjoy and nourish themselves with. I'm really keen on the idea of it's a little loud. I'm really keen on the idea of that there's, this earth, this soil that we walk on and we depend on and we grow food from, and that's something we can steward and take care of, create a healthy lifestyle and healthy food for our community from, and hopefully leave it healthier for generations to come.
So there's a group of farmers and some organizations here on Finnriver that are working together as a coalition. You want to describe what that is and who they are and what you're doing and why?
Well, we set out, when we started working on this farm, we set out with the goal and the mission to collaborate with other entities, and just as a way of building community and sharing knowledge and diversifying what happens on this land. In our community, we happen to have a really incredible organization called North Olympic Salmon Coalition, and their nursery is here. They grow out riparian plants for restoration projects around the North Olympic Peninsula. So they are a great partner. They're very active in our community and have restoration projects along Chimacum Creek, helping to bring back the salmon runs here in Chimacum Creek, and really showcasing how fish and farms can work together and thrive, as opposed to being in such opposition to each other. And it feels like we've created a working relationship, not just us, but many of the other farms in the valley that really feel like they can both thrive in tandem with each other. We're rolling?
We're rolling, man!
All right, so here we're sitting in the pavilion at the cidery. We call this the cider garden, and we have a tasting room behind us and this kind of common space where we have live music. And one of our goals when we moved to this farm was to create a community gathering space, and people of all ages, everybody's welcome here. We open it to the community, and so far it's been just a fantastic success of bringing people from outside the community and people from within the community, and they come here, they bring their kids run around out in the grass and play bocce ball and throw frisbees around. The parents are able to sit and chat and enjoy a glass of cider, and so we see lots of people gathering and creating community here and getting to know each other, and it's quite a vibrant scene in the summertime, on the weekends especially.
So a cidery, huh?
Yeah.
Like, how is that different than a brewery?
Well, a brewery uses grain to ferment and create their beer, and a cidery is more like a winery. So we take fruit. So we take apples, we press them, separate the juice from the pulp, and ferment it. We inoculate it with a yeast, and that process is where the yeast are converting the sugars to an alcohol, and same way a red wine or a white wine is produced. And so we bottle it, and we make many different types of ciders, different flavors, different apples. We have about 6,000 apple trees planted here on the farm, and then we also buy apples from other small producers and then some larger producers of eastern Washington, and we use all kinds of crazy varieties, Ashmead's Kernel and Frequin Rouge and Medaille d'Or, and lots of French and English apples from maybe the 1800s or so. So super old apples, and part of that, for us growing apples and growing those heirloom apples, it's been really fun to imagine being in this place where we're kind of perpetuating or keeping those varieties alive, because they're old and they're cider-specific apples. They're not apples that you would eat otherwise. So they're made basically for cider production. And then some of the other apples we use are more mainstream, like Pink Ladies and Granny Smith and things like that. So that's a cidery. It's been, like I said, it's been a great community gathering space. It has grown kind of beyond our expectation, and one of the most gratifying parts of it is seeing our employee base grow, and the number of employees we have, and the local younger kids that we're employing to work in the kitchen and out here in the cider garden. The underage folks, of course, can't work in the production of the alcohol itself and the serving of the alcohol, but it's created a number of jobs in our community that we feel really great about, and some of those employees that we have gone on to, for one, stay in the community because they're finding interesting work and work that pays well enough, and some have purchased houses, and so we feel like it's been a very positive thing for kind of the economy of our little town of Chimicum.
Yeah.
Boy, I think since we've been here, I would say the most dramatic change we've seen related to climate change is just severity. And the summers appear to be longer, drier, hotter summers. The winters feel like they're moving maybe in the direction of being more moisture, warmer. So it changes every year, and it's not like a clear trajectory, but it's we've had some years where there's just very little snowpack because it hasn't been cold enough to accumulate snow. So we've got lots of precipitation, but for us that precipitation runs off down the mountain, and a lot of our water is stream-based water system. Port Townsend's water comes from a reservoir, so if that reservoir is not recharged slowly throughout the whole spring and into the summer, then we start losing water as that reservoir depletes. So I would say just managing the extremes. And for us as farmers, we try to do as many things as possible that are dry land. Like all my grain production is dry land grain production, so I'm not relying on water, but I am relying on natural rainwater and natural irrigation and soils that are sub-irrigated, and so that will be a challenge as we go forward, and partly working with the Bread Lab and WSU and Organic Seed Alliance. Those folks, they're very focused on how do we adapt to agriculture in the next 50 years, 100 years, etc. And a lot of that is seed adaptability and choosing seeds, choosing vegetables and grains and different crops that are better and more productive in drought conditions, or that can withstand perennial crops, or overwintering grains that can withstand high moisture levels, or wet feet is what we call it with grain. A lot of grains just die out and have problems with fungus and all those things.
So the perennial grains, what I've understood is that they help with carbon sequestration.
Sure. Yeah. Because there's no cultivation,
right?
Or a lot less cultivation. It's not that they necessarily last forever. They do have to be replanted, and there's a term called no-till farming, which is pretty popular and a growing concern, which is technology and equipment that allows growers to plant their seasonal crop behind last year's crop without plowing and tilling and disking and disturbing that soil microbiology, and also then releasing the carbon to the atmosphere. So the soils are kind of seen as a carbon sink if they're not if they're left undisturbed. So the challenge there for organic growing and no-till farming is weed management. Conventional farming has a bit of an easier go at it, from my understanding of it, with the use of herbicides, and so that's a trade-off with that process. And scientists out there are looking very closely at what are the trade-offs and where's the balance, and how does that all work. But for us organically, my focus, I feel like, is in the next years to come, is going to be how to minimize soil disturbance. And it's very natural, as somebody who grew up on a conventional farm in eastern Washington and smaller row crop vegetable farms, it's very we're really reliant on tillage for weed control. Right. And we're dealing with such high diversity that we have last year's plants trying to compete with this year's plants. So tilling and soil disturbance is an easy way to deal with that. And when you're no-till farming, you've got to somehow kill or let the new crop outcompete the old crop. So we do a lot of cover cropping with rye vetch, which is vetch is a nitrogen fixer, so it helps bring nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil. And rye is a great weed suppressor. It's a very vigorous northern climate crop, and it adds a lot of biomass back into the soil, so it helps build tilth and things like that. So there's, for our orchard, we planted a high density orchard, so the trees are really close together. They're on small root balls or root wads. The roots aren't very vigorous, so the trees don't get very big. You plant them really close together. They reproduce, or they produce apples really quickly. So in 3 years, we get a good apple crop, as opposed to 7 or 10 or whatever a standard tree might be. But the problem with that is, and it's something we just didn't think through carefully, is they don't send down deep root systems to capture the nutrients and the soil, the subsoil moisture. So one of our kind of long-term farm plans is to, as these trees start to taper off in production, is to start interplanting the larger standard trees that have the more vigorous root systems that will tap into sub-irrigated soil profiles. And
so the new crop of trees that you planted out there will have another planting of trees at some point in between those?
In between them. So if we have an area that has some disease in our trees, we'll pull those trees and plant a larger tree in their place. Or as we see decline in production, we'll slowly start planting larger trees. And we've got to do it slowly and incrementally because financially it's really difficult to catch up to, if we were just to replace our orchard with standard trees, we'd be taking care of and managing that orchard block for 7 years before ever seeing a productive crop come off of it. So our strategy is to do it incrementally and slowly. Tied into carbon sequestering and all the environmental issues of our day and agriculture and people's shopping behaviors and patterns and how we use energy. And what we feel like we can do here is show people that visit the cidery a piece of land that's productive and healthy, and it just by doing that, I think, gives them a real sense of grounding and a peace with something beautiful, something productive, and something healthy, and that we try to balance this idea of people, planet, and profit in our business. And we think of things in our world as food, energy, and water as like being the three pillars that we operate around and think a lot about in our daily business practices and farming practices. We are about to start installation of a solar system, and the North Olympic Salmon Coalition and the creek restoration, water conservation, and creating a space where people can gather and create community and see where and what it looks like for an apple tree to grow an apple, or the tomatoes or the corn or whatever it is that especially kids don't oftentimes see that,
right.
Or they see the neighbor's cows and the whatever it is, there's a connection that's slowly being lost. And I think having a space for people to relax into a connection to all that has been really powerful, I think, for us to see that happening. I think we're really lucky that we live in this and farm in this area because it is so well supported. Yeah. The local economy really has benefited from all the local farms producing food. The local farms have benefited from the people with the mindset of local is healthy, keeping money circulating within the community as opposed to things being grown here and shipped outside the county or the state or the Northwest. We've got the Chimicum Corner farm stand across the street that's doing fabulous, and it's focused on bringing in as much regional food as possible and local food from neighboring farms, and really doing a great job of just educating and advocating for local food. So we've got great partners that are out there, whether they're an individual who just enjoys the natural beauty of the farmscape or the healthy food coming from the local farms. We're just hitting our stride. Yeah, we got lots of projects ahead of us. And we continue to grow, and I think the next handful of years will be really exciting to see. Not necessarily just for what happens with our business, but just what happens to the surrounding community. And it just feels like there's some really great synergy happening amongst different organizations and energy to really be thoughtful about how development happens and cognizant of what growth looks like and what that means for a community to grow. Because this area, going back to climate change and weather extremes, the Northwest is really being looked at as a safer, more stable place to live.